Chapter 17 The Redmont Estate. The dungeon was full of people and silence. Guards led them past rooms rife with the odor of unwashed bodies and overflowing slop buckets. No doors sealed the cells. Instead, inmates were chained to the walls with just enough slack to reach the center of the room where the slop bucket stood. Haille glimpsed men, women, but mostly children, thin, pale, and eyes empty of hope. He was locked into a manacle in a cell identical to all the others and left to stare into the faces of unfamiliar children. One child, one of the ones liberated from Quentin Stills just 2 days before, protested, "But Avenger Red saved us!" The guards, without speaking, turned on the boy and held him down as they pried open his jaws and cut out his tongue, his teeth clacking against the blade. His cries turned into inarticulate howls of pain as they tore out the flesh by its tendons, then threw it into the slop bucket with a plop. The boy continued to weep, but no further examples were needed. The other prisoners remained silent. The following days were spent waiting while overseers came to assess them. The few adults among them were removed as well as older children. There was little food, only stale bread once a day and water that tasted of chalk. Although Haille was weak and lightheaded with hunger, it was hard to work up an appetite with the odor from the slop bucket filling the cell. Instead, Haille, like the other children, curled up and tried to drift in and out of a shallow daze that was never quite sleep, but never full wakefulness either. On the third day, a guard and key lackey came to him and held a ragged picture of Jasmine in front of him. The page seemed like a scrap of a dream held out to taunt him. "This came from you, no?" the guard said. "Yes." At the guard's signal, the lackey moved close to him with his jingling ring of keys, turned one in Haille's lock, and freed him. "This way," the guard said. Haille followed in silence, his head spinning with hunger and his legs aching from days of being folded beneath him. He searched the other cells as he passed for his friends, but saw only unfamiliar faces or empty manacles. The guard led him up a set of stairs, Haille breathing hard and leaning against the wall for balance. The sun outside was blinding. For a moment, Haille could not tell if it was morning or afternoon. The shadows were long and the sun bright, but the cool air and the mist over the fields told him it was morning. In daylight, he could take in many of the buildings of the estate. They were of timber and wattle construction with slate roofs and smoking chimneys. Everywhere there was movement, girls carrying pails of water or milk, boys leading donkeys laden with everything from bricks to sheaves of wheat to steaming fresh bread loaves. Free of the stench of the dungeons, Haille's mouth watered at the smell of fresh baked goods. Like the dungeon, the estate was strangely quiet. Absent were the greetings, laughter, or even chit-chat among passer-by. It did not take long for Haille to notice that among the women churning butter and milking goats, the men working in fields or laying shingle on the rooftops, or even the children spreading feed for the chickens, there were overseers. Guards like the one leading him, with cruel eyes, studded clubs, and leather whips. The Redmont estate was one of industry and productivity, but run completely on the labor of slaves, stolen slaves. Haille fought back tears. This was where he had led his friends, led himself, and it was worse than any life he could have imagined back at the castle, enduring insults from children and the disapproval of his father. Life in a far-flung orphanage would have been better than this, he realized. Amidst his tears came an anger, a confusion, and a loathing for Avenger Red and her own treachery, his hate for her almost equal to his hate for himself and his own gullibility. The guard did not even check to see if he followed. There was no point in trying to flee. Haille might as well have been in chains. He remembered the curtain wall they had passed through and the earthen fortifications and pickets before that. The guard led him by lines of slaves digging trenches. There were men on these chain gangs. Haille searched their numbers for Val and Cody, but to no avail. He was surprised to be led into the main house, the same building they had been lured into the first fateful night. This time, instead of entering into the long hall in the east wing, the guard walked into the main entrance. The halls beyond were decorated with fine tapestries, polished mirrors, and filigreed candelabrum made of silver, gold, and bronze. The guard looked out of place among the finery, dressed in his sweat-stained shirt and threadbare work trousers. Still, he moved through the hallways as if he was the lord of the manor himself, Slave girls scampering out of his way, manservants bowing and groveling to him. Finally, he turned into the room that Haille knew from the scent of parchment, vellum, and candle wax was a library. The room was much too small for the plethora of books inside. They lined the walls to the ceiling. Rolling ladders leaned against shelves to access the highest volumes. Piles of books teetered on the floor and study tables. Among them sat open ledgers and scrap paper covered in calculations. Amid all the clutter was a boy. He looked to be 12 by his facial features, but would have been short for his age. Even standing at the table closest to him, he could not quite reach his arms across it. His sleeves were too long and his collar too wide. He was startled by their entrance, tossed his quill into an inkpot, and dropped his chin to his chest in a perfunctory, subservient bow. Haille noticed a bowl of porridge and a steaming cup of cider next to him on the table. His stomach grumbled. "Where's your master, Ratface?" "He had to discuss terms with a merchant from Trilham, sir." "Tell him I've brought another scribe for him." He turned to Haille. "You can read, right, boy?" Haille nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good. Listen to Ratface here until Master Redmont returns." Haille swallowed. He had no desire to be near Gaust Redmont again. Once the guard left, Haille put his hand to his shirt to make sure his bite palette was hidden. He did not want to meet the same end as the boy with a crippled arm did at the hands of their master. The other scribe came around the table and offered an ink-stained hand. His eyes were deep pools of sympathy. "Hiya! I'm Rimmeld, but most everyone calls me Rim." "Derek," Haille said without hesitating, unsure if his real identity would be an asset or liability in such a den of outlaws. "You have come from the dungeons," Rim said, a statement, not a question. "You must be hungry. Here." Rim offered his bowl of porridge. "You sure?" "Go ahead. I remember my first days too. They keep you underfed so you're weak and won't resist. They cut a boy's tongue out in the dungeon for speaking." "I don't doubt," Rim said, handing the bowl to Haille with 2 hands. Haille thanked him and set to devouring it, his spoon scraping the sides with vigor. "I heard Redmont smash the head of a crippled boy too." Haille nodded. "Master Redmont hates weakness. You'll find no flawed specimens among his stock." "Is that what we are now?" Haille said, his spoon stopping mid-scrape. "It is what we all are," Rim said, moving back around the table. He rolled his sleeve over his forearm to reveal a simple ram's head inked on the underside. "But we have little ways of remembering who we really are." He dipped the quill in the inkpot and applied a few drops to the symbol on his arm. "My family's coat of arms. My father was a sheep trader outside of Falham." "How did you end up here?" "Raiders came down from the mountains. They burned the village. My brother went out to fight. I stayed back with my sister hiding in a field. I'm no use fighting. Books and ledgers, yes. Fighting, no," he said, twisting his mouth. "But 2 raiders came into the field. Must have seen our tracks. They were coming close to both me and my sister. I jumped up, ran as fast as I could to lead them away from her. They caught me, but not her." He took another dip in the inkwell. "Hopefully my brother survived and found her." He paused in his effort to darken the symbol on his arm, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand holding the quill. A stray drop of ink left a streak on his jaw. Haille had nearly finished the bowl of porridge, and afraid of taking advantage of his new companion's generosity, he moved to place it back on the table with some of the contents remaining. Rim, who was reaching again for the inkwell, flicked his hand to encourage Haille to finish. The motion was ill-timed, for he knocked the well over on its side, and dark blue-black liquid poured forth on the table. "Drat!" Rim said, his face suddenly pale and stricken. "Master Redmont will beat me." He scrambled around the table, picking up a few scrap sheets of parchment to fold up and use to stop the spreading pool of ink. The paper was not absorbent enough, and he pulled the end of his shirt from his trousers and began to dab at the ink with it, making more a mess of his clothes and hands. He froze when he heard the sound of footsteps accompanied by a sharp tap-tap sound coming from the hallway. Gaust Redmont appeared in the door. In the bright morning light streaming in the windows, Haille could see his eyes were a flinty gray, similar to the steel-colored stone that made up the buildings of his estate. His nose was webbed with red blood vessels, his cheeks sunken and flaking with dry skin. In his hand was a long walking stick with a metal foot on its tapered end. "What mess have you made now, Rim?" he said in a phlegmy voice that came right from his throat. His knuckles turned white where they clutched the walking stick. Haille felt a surge of protectiveness and stepped between them. "I am sorry, Master Redmont. I knocked over the inkwell." The strike with the walking staff came faster than he expected. Haille put up his arm to deflect the second blow. Both hurt, but were nothing worse than he had experienced in the fencing ring.
Once for talking out of turn, twice for insolence, and thrice for clumsiness,
Master Redmont said, striking Haille a third and final time. Haille kept his head bowed and wondered if the itching he felt on his face was a trickle of sweat or blood. He dared not move to check. Master Redmont was breathing heavily now, having spent the best of his efforts.
Who are you?
He wheezed. Derek of Castlebridge, Haille said.
Derek of Nowhere, Master Redmont said. You are my property now.
Yes, master, Haille said, the words of subservience like poison in his mouth.
Why is he here?
Master Redmont looked at Rim. He can write, Rim said. The guard had left the page from the folio. This was taken off him, Rim said, holding out the picture of Jasmine and moving to Haille's side, his hand on his shoulder.
Is that right?
Redmont snatched the page from Rim's hand, unfolded it, and studied the writing on the opposite side, his lips moving as he did so. When he was finished, he thrust it in front of Haille's face.
What is a runt like you doing with something like this? You like the picture, or can you read it?
I can read, sir.
Prove it.
Redmont shook the page in front of his face. The font of Jasmine grants the wish of a crippled child, the friendly pilgrim who seeks favour of the lady.
With a city accent, too. Where were you educated, boy?
Havisham Academy, Haille said, making up the name of an academy he hoped would fool Redmont.
Never heard of it, but it will be useful to have 2 scribes instead of 1.
He clapped his hands, and a female servant, an apple-shaped woman with a bonnet over her grey hair, entered.
Hilda, clean up this mess. I'm taking these rats to do inventory.
Lord Redmont did business in other wares beside humans, Haille quickly learned, accompanying the master of the estate to his wine cellars, ice houses, slaughterhouses, and smithies. His obsession for keeping accurate records ran deep, and Haille could tell Rim was glad to have help. They would often check their counts against one another and soon developed a shorthand consisting of looks, nods, and shakes, not to mention figures shown on their fingers, anything short of speaking, for Lord Redmont tolerated no distractions while he counted his barrels, boxes, and bodies. The master kept close watch over all parts of his estate, and therefore Haille saw every stretch of it. This granted him opportunity to search for his friends. Caitlin he found among a group of slave girls churning butter on the dairy farm. He was flooded with relief to see her and to know that she had not been sold off. It was possible to make eye contact with her, but little more. Once she saw him standing behind Redmont, ledger in hand, she looked away. Haille was uncertain if this was simply to protect their relationship from discovery, or if it was out of resentment that this was where his trust in Avenger Red had brought them. I've been such a fool. Val and Cody he found after 2 weeks. They had been set to repair parts of the curtain wall where a creek had undermined its foundation. Neither saw him, but he took note of their overseer, Travis Ogman, in case he showed up in the office seeking a writ to travel, which would mean he would be taking his slaves to auction. Where these auctions took place was a mystery to Haille, since slavery was outlawed in the realm, but Rim had answers. At night they would whisper what they knew to one another. Ever since Haille had taken a beating for Rim, they had been fast friends. Rim had offered to share his room, a small alcove in the attic afforded to him as a scribe, and Haille had accepted. It was cold and draughty, but better than the dungeon. Slavery is outlawed in the realm of Anthor, Rim explained, but not in other realms. The slaves can't be shipped through the port of Carisons. Instead, they go out of Black Cove Bay. It is north of Carisons, and they reach it through secret roads through the Worthern Forest. And of course Master Redmont has an inventory of every mercenary and crooked man for hire throughout the realm, so the slaves are escorted without too much harm. He protects his investment. If the High Council knew of it, they would act to stop it. They do know. At least some members do. But Redmont keeps them paid off. He accounts for bribes in the ledgers just like any other expense. And in the meantime, Red goes about stealing from their competitors and killing them if they are too successful. But who spreads the stories that she is a hero? The Redmonts themselves, of course, Rim said. They have plants in taverns and inns across the kingdom. I guess he has accounts for them as well, Haille said. Indeed. It's a genius enterprise, even if it's criminal. No doubt. Haille felt depressed. The web of evil entangling his world was growing only more formidable. Vondale's, Avenger Red, the High Council.